Hello, this is Clarence Moye with the Words Daily here with Marissa Jo Cerar, the showrunner of ABC's limited series Women of the Movement. Marissa Jo, MJ, great to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you as well. Excited to be here.
Very excited to talk to you. So I want to start with, I know that Women of the Movement was originally intended to be a an anthology series, excuse me. What did you as a creative mind want to focus on, which with each of these iterations should have been able to proceed?
Well, we still intend to keep telling these stories. It might just be in a different home,
Sure.
because, there are so many untold stories of Black women who have sacrificed so much, and we may or may not know their names. But my goal is just to keep telling these stories of women, summoning this unbelievable strength in the face of their worst nightmares. And so the goal is just to, you know, tell these stories as character driven, humanity forward, female forward, and doesn't necessarily have to take place during, the civil rights movement of,
Mhm.
of the 60s. And, my intended season 2 certainly didn't take place in the 60s. We jumped time quite a bit, and I hope we do get to tell that story elsewhere. But it's just, finding these stories where you may know the headline, you may
Mhm.
know about the crime or the circumstances, but you don't know the people and you don't know how it affected them. And so it's the
Right.
people behind the headlines, the families, the survivors, and really humanizing them in order to tell, a 6 to 8 hour limited series or season.
Right. It's and one of the brilliant things about this first season is that it does pick up such a wide swath of the story. Like, of course, I knew about the tragedy of Emmett Till. I knew about Mamie and how she reacted to it and then elevated, the conversation and became a part of the movement. I didn't know a lot of small historic details. I didn't know about Dr. Howard living in that community and being such a massive presence within that community and refusing to leave it. Huge aspect to that story. Small, detail, but an important one. Talk to me about doing all of that research and making sure that you had a complete vision of this story.
The research process was intense and
Mhm.
long. When I agreed to tackle this, all I knew is there was a book, an Emmett Till book, and I said I wanted to tell it from the mother's point of view. And I knew a little, but I didn't know how young Mamie was when she had Emmett. I didn't know all the things he survived. He survived a breech birth. He survived polio. All of this only to be murdered on his vacation. So I spent the entire summer, from June, I think, to August, just reading every book, every newspaper article, every poem, watching every piece of footage I could find. And there's a lot out there. There's newsreel footage from the 50s, every interview Mamie did. And the other people, attached to this case, journalists, and even, the people involved with the crime. And I just wanted to get every point of view because there's so many rumors, myths, there's so many people involved. The stories have changed over the course of many decades. So I just wanted to consume it all and then to streamline it. And at the time, I intended to tell it as 8 hours. It felt like that was what the story was telling me it needed to be. It was 8 hours. And I wanted each episode to focus on a different event. I wanted the first episode to be a coming of age story, about a mother learning to let go of her boy, to let him be a man, a boy learning to, let go of his mom and, find his own freedom. And I wanted episode 2 to be, a kidnapping thriller. In episode 3, I wanted to juxtapose, the cover up in the South with Mamie opening up the casket and showing the world what was really going on in the North. I wanted episode 4 to be an investigation, and episodes 5 and 6 to be trial, to be our courtroom episodes. So it was an intense process, and at the time I didn't have an assistant. I didn't have anybody but myself, so I just spent every waking hour I possibly could, but I wasn't, with my daughter, and just consumed until I sat down and wrote the pitch over about a week before I took it in and to ABC.
Talking about all of that research, this was a question I was going to ask you a little bit later, but I think it makes sense to do it now. All of that research, all of that time spent over that summer, clearly that wasn't the only thing you were doing during that, but it's
Yeah.
a large part of your life. And then to launch into the series and go through all of this intense, emotional, horrible, you know, almost despairing events. And I know there's a spin of hope against it, but the human nature, the human reaction to that is to have one of despair, and to be, just it's impossible to react to it and not feel just brought down by it. How did you come out of that moment at the end of the day? How did you keep from just operating in this dark cloud of despair for months and months and months?
For years. I mean, yeah, I mean, it was years. And I never felt despair at all. I felt honored to tell the story and
Mm,
just so inspired by Mamie, by her strength, because I'm a mom and I could not imagine finding that strength when my child was,
mhm.
murdered in just brutally murdered, discarded. They tried to cover it up. Then in the media, they portrayed him as a man. They tried to villainize the victim. I mean, so many things. And she just kept going because of her love, her intense love for her child and her people. And so that's what I really wanted to focus on and just show the world what a one person could do, a regular person. She was an educated, working woman in Chicago, and just like any of us. And she wasn't born into an activist family. Of course her church was very active, but she didn't consider herself an activist. She was called to it. So I was just so inspired by her and so many of the other people that are portrayed on our show. I mean, who deserve their own series, Dr. Howard, Mose Wright, Simeon Booker, Medgar Evers, Ruby Hurley. I mean, so many
Yeah.
people whose stories I knew maybe a blip or a blurb, and who, it was so hard for us to whittle it down because we just wanted to spend, episodes and episodes with them and seeing their world, but it didn't make sense for, the through line. So I just focused on how inspired I was, how inspiring she continues to be. And also, it was the summer of George Floyd when I was rewriting the scripts and
Mm,
before we got the series order. And it was happening again, the exact, the same terminology in the media. It was being used to describe him as they used to describe Emmett. It was happening again. So it just, at the end of the day, to really simplify the answers, it wasn't about me and my
mhm,
feelings.
mhm.
It was about really trying my best to honor the family and the lives lost, to put myself aside and to just tell the story in the best way that I could.
I mean, you're talking about all of these different perspectives. I'm just sitting here thinking about the NAACP working in the South and all in that time period must be, every time you walk out the door, terrified to walk out that door. But they were brave, and they were portrayed in the show as being just brave and getting the job done and doing what they could to help other people. You could make not only a limited series, I feel like you could make an entire dramatic series with multiple
Completely.
seasons about that story.
We kept saying that on set when we were working with all of the actors
Mhm.
portraying the different, heroes. And there's so many we couldn't even portray because there are just too many. It was just not realistic when you're making a show. But just to know that anytime you step outside, you could be assassinated and your
Mhm.
friends are being murdered in broad daylight in front of crowds of people. 2 weeks before Emmett gets there, it's terrifying, but that just shows again, like the bravery and the courage and just the strength that, I can't even imagine. And so that again, telling those stories, even just enough to make people say, who's Ruby Hurley, and Google her and look her up and everything she did. I thought that just kept me going, and
Yeah.
just focusing on that piece of it rather than how just horrifying it was, and looking at the photos, of Emmett and how he came to Mamie, and I had to keep doing it because she did it, and so I needed to put myself in her head, and I would just stay at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I would just keep looking at it, and I had pictures of Mamie and Emmett over my computer just so that, because I'd always just put my head down because it would get hard and I would get tired, but I'd look up and they would be looking at me. And so it just kept me focused, and I couldn't allow myself to feel the sadness or the despair.
Right. You're not telling the story alone, too, because you're also bringing with you three, I believe it's three women directing each of these episodes. Tremendous directors. Sorry, is it four?
Mhm.
It's four. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought it was two per three, two of the. So sorry.
Gina Prince Bythewood directed the first, Tina
Mhm.
Mabry the next two, Julie Dash the next two, and then Casey Lemons directed our finale.
Casey, that's right. Casey just did the finale. That's right. Talk to me about working with them.
Well, I knew Gina Prince Bythewood and Casey Lemons. I met Gina. I was a co-producer on her limited series called Shots Fired. It was on
Mhm.
Fox. I think it aired in 2017. So I met her back then, and we just, remained in touch and, shared work with each other over the years. And I just love her. She's a hero to all of us. Everyone knows who she is. She is this incredibly cool, filmmaker who we all worship. And so I knew she wasn't really itching to do TV again. And I was so grateful when I sent her the script and she said she was in. Is I like to work with people I know. It makes life so much easier because you have the shorthand, and this was so important. And I knew I was going to fight, and I was never going to compromise, and I was going to fight to get the right Mamie. I was going to fight to get the right cast, crew, costumes, sets. So I just needed someone who understood and cared as much, and she did. The story meant a lot to her. And I think part of it, I tell the story a lot because without knowing, my connection to this was born in Shots Fired in the writers' room there, because we met Oscar Grant's mother, Wanda Johnson, as part of our research for Shots Fired. Two of our characters were mothers who had lost children to gun violence. And I was just mesmerized by Wanda Johnson and her strength and the way that she spoke about her fight. And I just never forgot it. I never will forget it. And when I was at the meeting at Capitol Entertainment, when they were pitching me IP and they mentioned an Emmett Till book, I just thought of her, and I thought of all of the mothers. And so Gina just made the perfect sense for the first one. I had met Tina and Julie. I'd never worked with them before, but it was really important to me to find directors who had done TV and film. It was so important. I really didn't want it to be a typical broadcast show, which, no disrespect, but I really wanted it to feel cinematic. Gina,
Right.
also very important to her. Even the episodes she didn't direct were cinematic. So that was our goal. And then Casey Lemons, also filmmaker, but I met her. She directed one of my episodes of Shots Fired. I had like one of the best months of my life prepping and filming with her in North Carolina, and I just fell in love with her, and like was just so grateful that she also returned to TV and agreed to do the finale. And it was a great way to begin, a great way to end with these two women who are my heroes, but they're also colleagues and people that I call my friends.
I forgot that they filmed that in Wilmington. I actually live in Raleigh, so
Oh
it's a
yeah.
small world. You talked about your Mamie, obviously Adrienne Warren, fantastic actress. We you know, true full disclosure, we talked before recording about this force of nature who won a Tony for playing Tina Turner and Tina the musical. Talk to me about that dialogue and working with her to find Mamie.
She found Mamie. I just knew the first time I actually just saw her reel, and there was really nothing on there that said Mamie, but something said she's Mamie. And so we called her in. And the first time she read, I just said, That's her. There's the vulnerability in her. Her instinct wasn't to play superhero, it was to play real person, which I
Mhm.
think a lot of times with characters like these, we want them to be superhuman. We want them to say the right things and to be so bold and proud and loud. And maybe that's not who she was in the beginning. She was a single mom, she stumbled into this horrific event and transformed, civil rights movement as we know it today. And so just finding someone who played an actual human being who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, and that was Adrienne instantly. Nobody needed to tell her anything. And then she, had her own process where she would, find Mamie in the way she spoke and, physically altering herself as well. I mean, there's a lot of work she did that had absolutely nothing to do with me. But when we were together, my job was just to protect and to make sure she was in a space that was safe and where she felt like she could do her best work. And I think also for Adrienne, the reason that, and for, I'd say all of our cast and crew, it wasn't about Adrienne. It was about Mamie, always. She was always, and she would say to me, I just want to make sure that she's okay with it. And she would feel her with us. We were in the same courtroom where Mamie,
Right.
walked in there and he gave her testimony and had these cameras in her face. She just, she did her own thing. I had nothing to do with it. But what my job was to be a consistent voice and to protect her and to make sure she had all the tools that she needed, and that she felt if anything didn't make sense to her, that she could immediately come to me. If she was feeling overwhelmed, that I would come to her, but I would never cover. I'm sort of give you your space. You let me know if you need me. I don't like to micromanage. So I was just the luckiest person to have Adrienne. It just was the most important thing to me. And the day that I got the call that she got the role that everybody approved, I just started bawling. Then I called her. It was midnight in New York, and she started bawling. It was one of those nights I'll never forget.
Awesome. One of her most impactful scenes is largely a wordless sequence where she sees the body of Emmett. And then she walks out and she says, let them see what they have done. She wants the open casket. She doesn't want him touched in terms of embalming process. The show also is not sparing on what was done to him. I mean, you know, there is a representation of Emmett that is shown. Talk to me about that creative process and determining how far was too far, or were you following Mamie's command and just letting them see exactly how it was?
It was so important to me from the outline stage. Before the more than 2 scripts were ordered, before the show was ordered, I specified an outline. Like, we have to see what she saw. Otherwise, this show doesn't make sense. What are we doing? Censoring it? We have to see. Those pictures are everywhere. We have to see it, because that moment where she transitions, and you see, when when we were with Adrienne shooting that scene, it's one of the things I am most proud of in my career. That moment, that day we were filming it, I just knew, okay, we're going to be good. We're going to tell the story the right way. We got it. Because Mamie speaks so vividly. Any interview you Google with her about that moment that she had to identify his body, she writes about it in her book. And I just wanted that to be present on the screen. And it was. I mean, she just being in that room with her, and then moving to Video Village and everybody just silent, and watch it. You see the story playing out on her face. So it was designed from very early on. What the intention was to let the people see, meaning the audience, the broadcast audience, let them see what they did to her boy, to be with Mamie, to understand how brutal it was. And still, she chose to fight. She could have gone home, hid. She had every right to, but she didn't. And it was important to see him in order to understand how strong she was, and how huge that decision was that she made to open the casket after witnessing it. So we needed to see. And so it was really important. And luckily I didn't really have to fight. It was clear. And I think everybody got on board once they understood the reasoning behind it.
Mm-hmm. My last question for you, obviously, unfortunately, these stories don't go away. There's still many, many stories out there to tell. And as you've referenced earlier in this interview, but as you look back over this experience of telling the Mamie and Emmett Till story, how did this change you?
Oh, it's, the hardest thing I've ever done, because I cared so much. It's just, I always get emotional when people ask me about this part, because it was never a job. And when I finally was able to meet her family after they'd actually watched all 6 episodes, meet Zoom. I mean, eventually got to meet them in person, but when I got to meet them on Zoom and talk about it, and when they said, you got it right, I just exhaled, because I was so afraid that they were the people I wanted to love this, and to see that, I'm just using everything they've said. I've read every interview they've given. I just want to tell the story in the way they see it. So it changed me. It'll affect the decisions I make about the projects I do, which I've always only, accepted work that I felt like I could put my whole heart and soul in, because that's just the way that I do. That's the way that I am. But it made me realize how important it is to just surround yourself, from catering to first AD, with people who have the same vision and the same intentions and the same care. And I really feel like everyone on our crew cared so much. They cared so much. They just wanted to get the story right. And so, and I don't even know, I'm sort of rambling if that even answered your question. So I don't know if it changed, but I mean, I don't know how to articulate how it changed me. I care so much. I'll continue to care, but I don't know if I'll ever tackle something that is so meaningful ever again. I think that this is it. It's one of those things. I'll do other stories, but this one, it meant a lot, and I'm glad that the family supports it. And and I just hope people watch it and research more and get to know more, because there's way more to the story than we put in these 6 episodes of television.
Right. Well, Marissa Jo, thank you so much for the time. This was a great conversation, and thank you for the series. It's incredibly important. I hope people go out and seek it and absorb it and talk about it and remember it and carry that message forward.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.